everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Global Networking Week, sponsored by the Tulane Alumni Association. My name is Jared Bocage, and I'm Senior Director of Alumni Relations here at Tulane. It's my pleasure to be moderating the Consulting Industry Update and Networking session. It's my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker today, August Martin, Principal Consultant and Sustainability Strategist at ERM in Austin, Texas. Before I let Martin introduce himself, I want to give you a quick sense of how our session will run. August will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then at that time, we will move to some rounds of small group discussion and networking. I'd ask that you please keep your screen on mute during the presentation, and if you have questions, feel free to share them in the chat. Also, remember that this session is being recorded for an archive so that other Tulaneans can access it in the future. So that's a basic outline, but now on to the important business of today. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, August Martin.
Thank you, Jared. It's great to be here and to be a part of this session. And if you all don't mind, I have a few slides that I would like to share just to guide us today. And I plan on telling you a little bit about me, a little bit about what I'm doing, a little bit about my company, and some of the trends that we're seeing that are guiding how we operate during this very unprecedented and odd time during COVID. So with that, let me share my screen here. All right. So as Jared mentioned, I am a principal consultant in our sustainability strategy and disclosure group. I'll start by telling you a little bit about my company. But as you take a look at the screen, let me introduce myself a little bit more. I'm a Tulane alum 2 times over from the School of Engineering and also from the School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. So my focus at the School of Public Health was on environmental health sciences. So, and I want to provide this to you to give you some context and how it colors what I do today. So I got an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering, but at the time at Tulane in the early 90s, there wasn't an environmental engineering program or an environmental sciences program. We were seeing the beginnings of that with courses in the different engineering disciplines, but there wasn't a major that was focused on environmental science and engineering. I wanted to stay at Tulane, and the closest thing to that was a program at the School of Public Health in environmental health sciences that really was a great combination of water, waste, air quality, toxicology, epidemiology. So we got all of the heavy environmental topics, but we also had a unique connection to how that impacted environmental health and how that had public health impacts. So it was a really unique program. So through those 2 programs, I'm able to look at the work that I do in a different lens, because I'm in the back of my mind, and especially as we see now during this pandemic, I'm always looking at what's going on in the public health realm. How is what I'm doing impacting people? And it's really been beneficial along my career journey. So I work at a company called ERM, or Environmental Resources Management. Our tagline is that we are the business of sustainability. We are a consulting firm set up much like, I would call it a management consulting firm light. So somewhere between how a law firm operates and a traditional management consulting firm. We are true consultants. We have a series of folks that work with us. I told you a little bit about my career, but I also work with licensed professional engineers, licensed professional geologists, archaeologists, biologists, accountants. I have colleagues who have backgrounds in biology, English literature. So we bring a diverse group of folks to the table to run our business. Here are some of the key sectors that we operate in: oil and gas, mining, chemical. The main sector that I focus on is our technology, media, and telecommunication sector. So I work with large companies like Dell and with Samsung on technology and for products and helping them to operate more sustainable, both from an operations perspective and also helping them to think through their supply chain and how they're creating the most sustainable product lines. And on the opposite side of that, how they're handling responsible disposal of their products. So some of the services we offer, you can see here as well. Environmental health and safety is a key part of what we do. We also handle risk and social impact. But at the core of what we do and what I do is all around sustainability strategy and disclosure. It's been interesting over the past 6 months or so. We've seen a dip globally in oil and gas. I have a lot of clients that have been impacted by the disruptions in the oil and gas sector. I also have a lot of colleagues that have been impacted. But the interesting thing about my industry is that, in the consulting industry, is that we have a lot of cross-training within my company. So there's a lot of engineers and scientists who were working for large oil and gas companies all of a sudden that had their project portfolios dwindle, but we were able to cross-train them in those same skills. If they were designing certain aspects of a refinery, we were able to cross-train them and have them come over to another sector, like the technology sector, and help us to figure out manufacturing facilities on that side. So as you've seen that some companies in the news, like Apple and Facebook and Verizon and Microsoft, are actually still doing very well. Their employees are still at home. They're still working toward their goals, which has fared well for the group that I work in. So we've been able to backfill a lot of the work with some of my colleagues by cross-training them and having them work with us on the technology side. So here's a little bit about what I do from day to day. I wear many hats. I mentioned a little bit about supply chains. One of the hats that I wear is that I'm one of our electronic stewardship practitioners at my firm. So what that means is I work with companies who produce electronic products, and they have to figure out what they're going to do or what their customers are going to do once they finish using those products. You know, on my desk, I'm working on a laptop. I have an iPhone. I have an iPad. My kids have phones and iPads. So the amount of e-waste that we generate is staggering. I was reading a United Nations e-waste monitor report recently, and in 2019, there was approximately 54 million metric tons of e-waste generated. Per person, we generated about 16 pounds per person in 2019 of e-waste. Only about 20% of that is recycled and returned and handled responsibly. So 80% is not. That waste either ends up illegally shipped to other countries or burned and incinerated or ends up in a landfill, which creates other environmental issues for everyone, but also for clients. So I'm responsible for working with companies to green that downstream supply chain and to help them with strategies to make sure that those products are recycled responsibly. I'm also the sustainability lead for a multinational client, which means that I support that client in their sustainability strategy across their entire portfolio, whether that is green buildings that they're building in Europe, if they are thinking about renewable energy plays, if they are thinking about having an electric fleet of vehicles instead of the current fleet that they have, and also from a products perspective, and a product stewardship perspective, how can they think more broadly in terms of net zero and climate stewardship in their supply chain when they're developing products. I'm also a global trainer. I train our staff globally on electronic stewardship as it pertains to sustainability. My company is about 5,500 people. We operate in about 40 countries. So we're a global company, but still very small to be a global company. So I train auditors in Turkey. I train auditors in the United Arab Emirates, auditors in the US and Canada on best practices in their countries on how to work with their clients and our clients in the supply chain there. And one of the most important roles that I have is that I lead our operational sustainability efforts. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. But not only do I do this work for clients, I'm helping my company to become greener through our sustainability efforts. So I'll talk just a little bit about that now. Everything we do with our clients and also internally is directly tied to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And for those of you who are not familiar with those, you may have heard of the Paris Agreement, the 2015 large event that took place where there were 17 Sustainable Development Goals developed to tackle climate change, education, economic growth. Everything that we do has a direct link to one of those Sustainable Development Goals. Every project that we undertake, we link it to one of the 17 goals. Every one of our internal activities that we have to meeting our sustainability goals is tied to one of those goals as well. So here are a few of our impact areas. We worked with several clients to help them with environmental health and safety, climate risk and social impact, and how to think through things like business resilience. Business resilience is something that you all might have heard in the midst of COVID-19. We also do that through our operations. I'll talk about that a little bit. Every year we look at our company and we identify material areas where we can have an influence, and what areas will help us to further our sustainability agenda. And lastly, we have an incredible employee-funded foundation that actually is a grant foundation where we fund projects around the world that are focused on, once again, the Sustainable Development Goals. So here are our market drivers that we've identified in our business over the past several years. But these are the three emerging themes that we're seeing in the industry. And this is how we operate from a client perspective and also from an operational perspective. And these things are business resilience. And by business resilience, I mean as we're seeing during COVID, how do we help companies to rebound and to navigate through a shock like COVID? That can show up in many ways. Some of that is operational. Some of that is looking at a supply chain. Some of it is very safety driven. We've all seen news articles almost daily about CDC guidelines about safety and about distancing and things like that. My company has EHS practitioners and experts who are skilled in occupational health and safety, safety management, process safety management. So we're actually the boots on the ground who go into companies and help them to actually operationalize what that means during COVID. So if you have to have physical distancing in your office or in your warehouse or in your business, what does that look like in your particular geography? Are you following all of the local regulations and the state or national regulations that you need to be following in terms of safety? So we get involved on that side. And from the low carbon economy transition driver, that involves helping companies to achieve their net zero goals by the target years that they have told us in the news and in the press lately. I've been reading several headlines over the past several months about companies like Microsoft and Apple going net zero by 2030. Amazon signed a $2 billion climate pledge with an organization called Global Optimism last year to fund projects that are focused on lowering carbon and going net zero by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the climate agreement. So we're seeing companies that are going toward this low carbon economy transition more quickly than we anticipated. And it's not just a nice to have, it is something that is really having a tangible impact on their business. And the last driver we've seen is environmental social governance, or ESG, and sustainable finance. So we're seeing a lot of investments in our work. We do several capital projects that involve building heavy infrastructure. And on the funding side of those, investors are interested in how these projects will have an impact on the environment, on social issues. Are there any labor practices and social impacts that need to be considered? And on the governance side, how are these projects really situated and set up to be sustainable over the long term to avoid disruptions? So that's a little bit of the drivers that we've seen. And now I'll talk a little bit about our operations. So I mentioned that I work on our internal sustainability targets as well. And these are the 6 areas that we've identified internally that ERM is going to focus on from an office, from an operations, from an employee perspective, to help us to support those sustainable development goals again, and to help us to meet our science-based targets, which are the publicly facing targets that we've made in our sustainability report that we want to achieve. Some of these are short-term, some of these have 2025 targets, but a couple of these that I'd like to highlight are climate risk, our people, and contributing to society. So from an internal perspective, we want to reduce our emissions by 30% based on how green our buildings are and our vehicle fleets. And we want to reduce our business travel and commuting by 11% by 2025 by having smarter transportation practices, and we have a new green travel program where all of our business travel is tracked whenever we can travel again. All of that is quantified so we can measure what we're doing and make improvements there. And one of the hot topics that we're all seeing right now is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have several programs around that within my firm. And I'll tell you a little bit about that now and end on that. But part of our DEI plan is we have formed a North American DE&I Advisory Council. We have our recruiters working to expand our network to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. We formed employee resource groups focused on gender diversity and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We have trainings that we've done on implicit bias, microaggressions, and anti-racism that have been phenomenal and eye-opening. And it's really been a positive shift to see. It was driven, unfortunately, by the events that we've seen over the past couple of months, but it's given us the opportunity to jump into this conversation. So I wanted to leave you with this parting thought from our CEO from a recent article that she had in Telegraph, where she talks about COVID-19, but it's really framed how we think about the world, and the world is really a global commons. We're all interconnected, and having conversations now about climate and biodiversity and nature loss. We see what's going on in California with these wildfires. We see what's going on in terms of inequality with the events that have happened in the US. So tying all of those things together for the course of furthering sustainability, especially in the consulting industry and beyond, is key. So wanted to leave you with that and say thanks for having me. Here are some contact information for me and my LinkedIn profile and a couple of other links to find out more about what we do.
Awesome, August. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed all those comments and really enjoyed having you get the conversation started. But now it's on to the second part of our session, which is the fun part where we're going to let the conversations continue with all of you who've joined us today. So as I reminded you in the beginning, basically what we're going to do now is use the breakout room function to put you all into some small groups. And we're going to try to do that 3 times in the time that we have remaining. So in that time, we've got 2 big goals for you. We'd like you to introduce yourselves to one another and share what drew you to the session. And then talk a little bit about what you found really compelling in August's remarks, or maybe bring up some questions. I know that there were some questions in the chat about carbon neutrality. So folks will be popping around and we'll get those conversations going.
Hey, Jared, can you hear me?
I can. Hey, Dory Lynn, how are you?
Ah, I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm good.
I wanted to hear August's talk, but I guess I popped on just as that must have been ending and people
Yeah,
were being
we're in,
breakout room.
yes, we are. But it's all being recorded, so you'll certainly be able to enjoy his comments later. But I'm glad you did join. Are you? Do you need to be assigned to a room? It's looking like people have moved around a little bit. We'll probably do an all Q&A session in the next round.
Okay, yeah, it sent me to breakout room 2, but it didn't seem like there was anybody else in breakout room 2. So that's why I
Look,
came
some
back.
people, I think maybe some people weren't ready for screen time this morning, so they opted out at the breakout.
That would also be me. I fall into that category.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So yeah, I think what we can do probably is we're almost to the end of the first round, and it's looking like based on who's left, it might make sense to just do a general Q&A. But let me just touch base with our folks. Hold on.
All right. Well, I will mute myself for the moment and make a phone call and see what happens next, because I'm kind of just curious about the whole how it all works. So yeah. So
Great.
I'll be here, but I'll just be muted and seeing what happens next.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I know people are making their way back from the first breakout room. I think we may all, it looks like, be back. And actually, it seems that we had some folks, let's see, did we lose our? There we go. All right, August. Well, we had our first round, and it looks like we actually have a great group, I think, that fits on one screen. So rather than jump back in, I think if people are okay, we can kind of open it up to general discussion. August, you okay with that?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, we all fit on screen, so it's the ideal networking. So if folks maybe want to have some questions, actually, there were some questions from the original chat. One was from Ashley.
Yeah.
And it was about carbon neutrality. What does it mean for companies to go carbon neutral? And does that mean they will not have any waste? Like, so how does that calculate? Right.
So it depends. So overall, carbon neutrality or having a net zero carbon footprint is really finding that balance of reducing your carbon emissions based on your business. So for some companies that may be, if you're looking at a refinery, for example, they have a lot of carbon that they emit to the atmosphere just from a facilities perspective. So helping them to be smarter about those emissions and to reduce those emissions so that they're having the least impact possible. For some companies that generate or have the capacity to generate a lot of waste, like I mentioned Dell before, they look at it from an extended producer responsibility lens. So they want to have a say in all of their Dell branded products to make sure that all of those are responsible, are recycled responsibly or reused or refurbished so that they either are repurposed for beneficial use, or if they have to be disposed of, that that is done in the most responsible manner possible. It doesn't mean that they won't have any waste. Waste and minimization is part of it, but there's also a zero waste part of that, where some companies are repurposing and reusing waste, and there are networks of company that actually broker for each other's waste. So I'm working with a small company in Tennessee who basically takes floor tiles from furniture companies, and they turn those and furniture distributors, and they turn those into this green material that you can use in wetlands. So it's doing things like that that sort of greens the supply chain, but it doesn't necessarily mean there won't be any waste. That's the goal, but I think a more realistic goal is looking at minimizing waste and how you handle it.
Awesome. Well, certainly welcome questions from others. I do have some other questions.
Okay.
Just thinking a little bit about, broadly about consulting. I think one of the most interesting things from your talk was talking about the diversity of backgrounds that are represented in your firm. So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions there, or for people who are interested in getting into consulting? What's your advice in terms of thinking about their background and what makes a good match for this kind of work?
So, Koya and I were just talking about this in the breakout. I think a common misconception is that you have to have, or if you have a particular background or skill set, that you be limited by that working in consulting. So in reality, what we see is that consulting is very behavior-based. So, and what that means is that you have to be able to be collaborative, you have to be creative, and you have to be organized in order to work on these projects. So that's less important. Well, actually, that's more important than your background in many ways. So the type of skills we're looking for is, we ask people during our interviews behavior-based questions, not, give us an example of something that you did as a biologist to prove X. We ask questions like, what was a teaming situation that you have been in where you've had to take a leadership role, and how have you managed that? Or if we are interviewing students who haven't been in the workforce yet, we'll say, tell us about a class or a project that you worked on where there were varying personalities and you had to deal with them. How did you navigate through actually completing the project? Or tell us a little bit about how you organize your ideas and your approach to solving problems. So it's more assessing how people think and how creative that they can be, because we work with lots of teams of people from various backgrounds. I mentioned we have people in various countries that have different cultures. So it's really a melting pot of people, and being able to be nimble and creative, and also to be a little bit, assertive to get your ideas across is what we really look for. So if you have a PhD in physics, or if you're an English major, if you have those skills, we're looking for those things first.
That's great. You mentioned interviewing students, and then also, I guess, people with PhDs in physics, which are a little bit beyond. Could you talk a little bit about what you see trend-wise in terms of the on-ramps? I mean, do you see a lot of people going into consulting right out of college? Do you have recommendations for people who might be considering it as a mid-career change?
Yeah, there are. I think that's a common misconception, Jared. So about whether you can go directly into consulting right out of college, and you definitely can. And I think it's an industry where you can really chart your own course. For students, we tell them, just as I mentioned, we're looking for students who really want to be a journeyman or to be a generalist at first. So we will expose them to and put them on at least 5 to 7 different project teams throughout the first year. One of that could be in they could be in the pharmaceutical industry for a couple of months. They could be working in the oil and gas industry for another couple of months. They can be in technology. They could be doing environmental compliance work. They could be doing stakeholder engagement work. But we really want to give people the chance not only to discover where their strengths are and what they like, but give them a sense of what we're doing and where they feel they can have the most impact, so we can keep them engaged going forward. So I think in what I've seen at some traditional engineering firms is that they're looking for specific, and I've worked in some of these firms, that they're looking for specific backgrounds, and you have a pretty rigid and set path on going up the ladder. In consulting, and what I've seen is you can shift based on where you want your career to go, or where you are in that part of your life. For example, I talked about COVID a lot. We've had folks during COVID that are at home that have realized, hey, I love this time with my kids. I want to dial it back. I don't want to be in this leadership role anymore. Can I be a doer? And we've said yes. We've had a lot of parents who have reduced their hours so that they can focus more on their families, or they want to just look at doing a sabbatical or doing something else. And they haven't been penalized for that. So it's less of a meritocracy and more of you being able to really influence where you want to be and go at your own pace. And we have some folks that want to go right to the top and be a partner in the firm. We have some folks who are nearing their 70s and they just want to do field visits. So, and you know, we have some of those PhD physicists in the field, and they just like walking around tinkering with things. We have some very aggressive students that have been out of college 3 to 5 years, and they're on a partnership track, and they want to go right to the top and to be a vice president and an owner in a company. So there's been a diversity there.
That's really great to hear.
Yeah.
You mentioned your firm experience, and I imagine, you know, there are obvious advantages to working at a firm the size of yours in terms of flexibility and that kind of structure. I know there are lots of other people who go out on their own and really and consult as individuals. Do you have any perspective on sort of advantages or disadvantages there?
I actually did that. And
you do have a perspective.
Yeah, I do. So when the recession hit in 2009, 2010, I was a part of a layoff, and I had been doing this for, you know, several years. And I said, I can do this, you know, like it's hard. Anybody can do it. So I was basically, you know, August Martin and Associates. I didn't have any associates, but but I basically consulted with my former companies doing the same thing I was doing, but I negotiated a rate with them, and they hired me for various projects, but it was sort of an at-will relationship. So I could leave whenever I wanted to, and in the relationship they could as well. And I enjoyed that because I got to do, I got to pick the work that I wanted to do. I didn't have an employment gap because I was still working. But the difficulty was you basically get paid only if you work. So starting something like that requires a large network. And the insurance part of it was very murky at the time as well. And the costs associated with that were high. So I just decided to go back into a more structured firm, like the one I'm at now, where I have that same flexibility to really kind of run my own business within the firm, but I have all of the other benefits and the structure around me that I need to do it.
That's really great.
It's a challenge. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you can do it, it provides you a lot of independence and a lot of freedom to really do what you want to do. Sure.
A nice crossover between our entrepreneurial session that we'll be having later today. So
yeah.
Well, if there are, I don't know if there are any other questions. I feel like you've won me over. So I want to move into consulting. What's the one piece of advice you'd give me moving forward as first steps toward taking that journey?
It would be identifying some of the areas where you would like to focus. So I'm in the environmental industry, but you know, there's healthcare consulting. There is consulting in the chemical sector. There is social consulting and working with companies on branding as well. So I would look at the areas where you want to focus first. And then, for example, if you're interested in sustainability or sustainable development and getting involved in that, working or contacting someone like me to point you to hiring managers, because it's a lot easier to get on the radar of our recruiters and the hiring managers from inside the organization. People often hire who they know and hire based on current employees and their networks. because that's a more trusted network. So, so yeah, that's what I would do. You know, if for a firm like mine, I looked at the job offerings yesterday. We have close to 200 openings right now, globally, and those range from field scientists to administrative folks to partners in the firm and and professionals who want to get involved in and find out more about social issues and how they can impact from a human capital and labor practices and diversity and inclusion perspective, because that's what we'll be looking for going forward. So.
Amazing. Lots of opportunity. And actually, I just, sort of as a perfect concluding note, we have a question from Ryan about he's actually interested and has seen some of the postings that you mentioned and is
Yes.
talking about ways to contact. So certainly August has shared his contact information
Yes.
as part of the presentation. We can send that to you all as a follow-up, but also that's really sort of the purpose of Global Networking Week and the Whova app.
Yeah.
So all of us are part of the Whova app, and you can use that throughout the week to connect with one another and start to build those relationships. And that's really the kinds of things we want to see.
Yeah. And so just one thing about that, Jared. So please reach out to me. I do answer my phone. I do answer my emails. I'm very active with alumni and getting them connected, not only to my company, but to other folks in my network, if they're looking to make a change. But the key is to have some type of connection to someone within the company or someone that has impact within the company. So I've had students that have applied to jobs before, and they would list me as a reference. So when the hiring managers see it, there's an immediate connection. Or we have an internal job recommendation board, so I can go in from our side and actually recommend people and say, hey, look at this person, here's their resume. And they're far more likely to take a look at it that way than if it's just coming in with the other resumes from outside. So.
Awesome. Well, yes, and I really just, we're just about out of time, but I really just want to underline what August just said. I think it exemplifies the spirit of what Global Networking Week is all about. In addition to all your service as a leader with the Alumni Association, you clearly are committed to helping out other Tulaneans, which is really what we'd like to see.
Yes.
So thanks everyone today for joining us. Thank you, August, for being our speaker. Please remember to continue to use the Whova app to connect with each other throughout the week. And you can always find more information about our career programs and all of the events going on under the umbrella of the Alumni Association at our website, which is alumni.tulane.edu. I look forward to seeing you all throughout other sessions today, and have a great day and roll wave.